Hello and welcome to Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. Thank you for joining me. If this is your first time, I am Laurel Boivin. I am a life and leadership coach. I'm one of the co-hosts of Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life. My podcast partner and dear friend, Laurel Holland, will be back in a few weeks for more episodes and more conversation with me and with her own guest. But today, it's just me and you. And today I am bringing you a special guest with an incredible, inspiring story. My guest today is Angela Whitten. Angela is a mother from Wells, Maine, who tragically lost her 18-year-old son, Trent, to suicide in June of 2022. In response to that loss and pain, Angela co-founded Stay for Life, a nonprofit dedicated to mental health awareness and suicide prevention. Angela brings a deeply personal and unique perspective on the critical importance of supporting mental health and well-being in our communities with individuals, loved ones, and strangers. In her work now as executive director for Stay for Life, Angela shares practical tools and resources that can help individuals navigate mental health challenges, both for themselves and in their supporting roles for others. So you are in for an incredible conversation. Angela is going to tell us a lot about the work she does and why she does it. So let's welcome Angela. Welcome, Angela. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation and for the time and allowance to be here and share a little bit of my perspective on life.
I'd love to start with the question of what does a beautiful life mean to you?
That is a really complex question, and I will do my best to stay on track with the answer. To me, I think a lot of it boils down to being authentic to yourself. I think we all are sent here with our inner being, who we are down to the core of who we are. That's not to say that we don't have a lot to learn, while we're here. But I think beautiful life is being as authentic to your inner soul as possible, as honest with yourself and the outside world as possible, and trying to keep that ever moving balance of life between, work and life and self-care and care for others and all of those things that we all try to hit on throughout life, which that's probably one of my hardest points to grab is all of those, all the balance. But I think that that's an important part of life as well.
So how would you describe your beautiful life? What is it about your life that you consider beautiful?
Well, there's two things that immediately come to mind when you ask me that. And the first one is I'm a mom. And I don't mean that just by the two boys that I birthed myself. I mean that intrinsically. I am just, since I was a little girl, there was very little that I wanted more in life than to be a mom. I've always been just the kind of overseer and caretaker and loving, nurturing kind of person, I suppose. So a beautiful life to me is being able to share that gift of love that I have to give to everyone. And I'm that mom who anybody walks through the door, I'm trying to feed them. I'm trying to give them a pillow. I'm trying to give them a blanket. That's just intrinsically me. And the other part of that, I think for me, it kind of goes hand in hand with being a mom is, I am pretty sure that I was meant to be living in the pioneer times when we work for everything in our lives. Everything is homemade. Everything is, we don't have the modern conveniences that we do. Now, that being said, obviously, I used a curling iron on my hair today and we're talking on a computer and but I really, really thoroughly enjoy the simple life. Trying to minimize as much of the crazy rat race that we have. And I love the farm life. I've had little aspects of farm life in my life throughout my adulthood. trying to keep things as simple and honest, really, in my life and in my little humans' lives as possible. So I think that's all of those, make my beautiful life. And one of my best practices of self-care, it sounds crazy, but it's cooking, it's producing in the kitchen. And I grappled with that for a long time because that sounds like it's work to a lot of people. But to me, that's when I'm in my zen, when I'm creating in the kitchen and it's just me and a little bit of music and creating something with my hands to nourish those that I love is my form of self-care.
It's so interesting because I'm hearing a lot about like the nourishment that you just used the word nourishing, right? That you are nourishing other people. And being a mom, like I'm going to say, well, I'm hearing relationships. Like you are more than a caretaker, you're a nurturer. And so, like, being a mom is probably the archetype that a nurturing soul embodies. But I can see that relationships and nourishing others is part of who you are and the life that you have created.
Yes, I think you're right there.
So, I am so curious. Tell us about, just to set the stage of for our audience, where you are in this world. Like, I know you're in Maine. That's how we met. But give us a sense of what does that home look like for you? What does that community look like for you? And how are you nurturing people in that community?
Yeah, sure. So I live in a very small town, a little larger than the hometown that I grew up in as a child. But I live in southern Maine in a town called Wells. We are a tourist community, so we're a much larger town in the warmer months than we are right now when it's 10 degrees and raining and snowing outside. But home to me is small town community, going to the grocery store and seeing the people that you know and the people's whose kids you've watched grow up, and the people who you worked beside, on the bench at sports events and things like that. And also a warm and comfortable home physically. My house is definitely not anything that you're going to see on any aesthetic websites or any, as you can see here. But that's part of who I am. It's just that comfortableness. I don't, I really try hard to make everybody around me feel as comfortable, both with me, their surroundings, and themselves as possible. So that's I think that's what home looks like to me.
Yeah. And so has this always been you? And I'm going to say that because I'm so curious about that inner work journey. And did you realize these things about you, that you were a nurturing, nourishing person and relationships were this important to you? Like, how did you discover that about yourself? And did you accept that easily about yourself?
So, I had a little bit of my childhood was a little different than a lot of people. As a child, my older brother and my mother and we moved around a lot as a small child. So, my family lived in Millinocket, Maine, northern Maine, very, very small community when I was born. And then throughout much of my childhood, we moved kind of throughout Maine. And then for several years, we lived in Texas, Dallas area. So much different than northern Maine, much more cityfied, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
And then after that, we moved back up to Millinocket, back up to northern Maine. So I think that a lot of that and a lot of my experiences through that time kind of shaped, my childhood a bit. I became a unique little girl who was shy and yet stood up for myself and stood up for those around me. So I think growing up, I was, and this is something that I continue to grapple with even now. My hackles get up very easily when I feel like either myself or anybody around me is being discredited or in any way being slighted. So growing up, I was never one to back down. So I would say that I was nurturing and caring, but in a different way, in a more rough way. Fast forward through high school and into college, in those beginning of college years, who isn't trying to figure out who they are and where they are in the world, and who their soul, what their soul looks like. So, but not long after that, so I married my high school sweetheart. We married a few years into college, and we had the surprise of finding out we were welcoming our first child when I was 20 years old. So I was a young mom. We were both adults, and we both knew what might happen, and at the same time, we weren't planning for that. But my ex-husband and I at the time both knew that we wanted to have children early so that we could enjoy the love of having them early. So once I was a mom, even though that little being wasn't outside yet, it all settled into place quite quickly and quite easily and naturally. So I think that right then and there, it kind of shifted into, okay, this is really who I am. And everything just felt really familiar as far as being a mom. So it happened pretty swiftly after that.
Yeah. So I'm so curious about your inner work journey. And we talk on Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life about inner work as the beautiful work. And it's really, I like to think of it as our becomingness, right? It's our intentional work, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like work, like cooking, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we do to learn and grow. And so tell me about, what does your inner work look like? And when did it start?
Yeah, so I've always been, or I shouldn't say always, probably mid-20s, I became pretty self-aware of mental health, my own mental health. I have always struggled as far back as I can remember with depression, anxiety, and didn't learn until a little bit later in life, but ADHD. So throughout my mid to late 20s, my depression was really starting to kind of become impactful in my life. And at that point, I hadn't addressed it in a formal way, but I knew that I was going to need to, because it was really becoming a big player in my life. So at about that time, I became, like I said, more self-aware of, okay, so this thing is going to be with me, and this thing really needs to be, I need to figure out how to work this into my life so that I'm not fighting against it forever. So I think my inner work really started then, late 20s, and then in the early 30s, I really started to grab things head on. There was a lot of things from my childhood that carried over into my adulthood that I knew that I needed to deal with. I had kind of been avoiding up until that point, but it became clear that these were things that I was going to need to sit down with and really look at and pull apart and figure out how I was going to carry that forward. And I could either continue to battle with it, or I could figure out how to walk alongside it. And I know that sounds really cliche, but that's how I see a lot of what we do when we struggle with our mental health. We can battle it, we can do this. And I've done that for a long time. But we're not going to win. So we have to learn how to walk alongside these things. So that's when my really big work started.
And so what did it look like then when you decided you really needed to walk alongside it? What did you have inner work practices? Did you reach out for help? How did you manage that?
Yeah. So I started professional counseling and therapy right about that time, late 20s, early 30s. And once I started professional counseling, it was apparent that there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And first of all, I was matched up with a wonderful, wonderful counselor. And I think that is tantamount to that inner work, is having someone that you can not only just trust, but somebody that you really mesh with, that you align with and kind of see eye to eye and have the same ideals. So once I got into the habit not habit, but really routine of becoming more familiar with these things that I was battling in my life and trusting the guidance of my counselor, then really just pushing through and taking these assignments, if you will. That's how I saw them. Every time I had a counseling appointment, which at that point I was going weekly, I'm a very black and white thinker. So at the end of the session, I always had in my mind, okay, so this week I need to challenge myself in this way, and this is what I need to work on, and this is what I need to try to undo, and here's what I need to go forward with. And just like that, week after week after week, month after month, year after year, continuing to challenge myself and really putting in pretty hard work, and just trudging forward with all of that.
And what does your inner work look like now?
Now, and I'm sure that we'll touch on it more in depth in a little bit, but right now, my biggest inner work, and by work, I mean a challenge, is balance. We'll talk here in a bit, but my personal life and my professional life have become very, very intertwined. And it's a work of passion, very much. So keeping that balance is really hard for me. So I continue to struggle. Once I sit down here at my desk and I'm in front of my computer, or I'm out into the world doing my work, I'm all in, and vice versa. When I'm in the kitchen cooking or doing something outside, I'm all in there. So it's hard to keep that balance, and that's what my inner work. And still in therapy, so still continuing to grow with some new lessons that I've been handed more recently in life. And some of that is the hardest work that I've ever done, that I think anybody in this world can ever do. So continuing to work on these life lessons, and ever evolving, right? None of us are ever a being that's finished, and we're not a complete project. We're always changing and evolving and figuring out what we need to do to keep up with ourselves and what we're learning from this life.
Yeah. And you had mentioned, finding a therapist that you trust, right? But I'm so curious about where or how, or did it at all, your self-trust change through this process of inner work?
That's a really good question. And that is something that I still struggle with. I think as a result of my childhood, my self-doubt is pretty high. And I still have a hard time trusting and believing in myself. And pair that with the black and white thinking, and I'm always looking for the right answer. And I'm always looking for the confirmation that I'm choosing the right answer. And my therapist now still tells me, honey, there's no right or wrong here. There is, I'm not going to tell you what the answer is, because there is no answer. So, but that being said, so I still struggle with believing in myself. But my line of work now has taught me so much more about mental health. So I'm getting more and more experience and education and training and whatnot. So that's become almost like a validation point. Oh yeah, this is what my gut is telling me, and this is what I know by scientific or research or what have you. So that has kind of helped me lean into my own trust as well.
Yeah. What's your go-to now when you know you have inner work to do? Do you show up with resistance, or do you have this, this is my next homework assignment? How do you deal with that?
My answer to that is yes. Resistance, yes. I am quite stubborn. I am quite for good reason. I don't go along with an idea easily. So for me, I need to have reasoning to change things. And so when I know that there's inner work, I sit with it for quite a while. And when I say quite a while, that may be dependent on, on the situation at hand. Quite a while, maybe a few hours, quite a while, maybe a few months. Then, and I really like to chew on things. I really like to pull things apart and look at, okay, so this is what I'm seeing in myself. This is why I'm knowing that something needs to be worked on by myself. And so what are the options? How can we go forward with this? Is this something that I want to bring to my therapist to bounce off of her? Is this something that I want to bring to my husband and bounce off of him, or my best friend? Because we know, there's all those different situations that require the different outlets. And sometimes it's just, am I just going to keep this intrinsic? And pardon me, the older we get, the more we do learn to trust ourselves and that intrinsic work, with nobody to bounce that off of but ourselves. So when I do know that I need to do the inner work, I guess it depends on what the problem is and what the solution is going to look like, whether it's, like I said, bouncing it off of somebody externally or working on it internally. But once I've decided that, the best outcome is some kind of change on my part, then I'm just very systematic. Okay, so, I know that I've gotten defensive when my husband and I, have a discussion about this. Okay, so how does that reflect on me? Where do I sit in all this? And I know that I don't want to get defensive, even though that's my go-to in life almost always. So what can I do the next time that I feel my hackles coming up? And how can I work towards a more peaceful goal with myself? And so much of that is, so much of that, like you've said, is inner work. And I think in our society, we have become so very concerned with where we are with the rest of the world and what the rest of the world is doing to us or against us or whatnot. I mean, yes, I care to a certain extent, but I want to feel calm and feel things flowing in me. So when my husband and I may have a disagreement and I'm getting defensive, it's not, I really try hard to, once I'm removed from the situation, I'm able to say, okay, so he said this and this is what got me defensive. Really, it has nothing to do with him. It has everything to do with me and how I react and respond. So my work, my inner work and my inner changes doesn't really have anything to do with him, so to speak. It's how can I become more comfortable with myself?
And it's so interesting because I think about this a lot. Our need for comparison, we're prone to looking at where are we compared to others, is really part of our core need for belonging, right? and our core fear of abandonment. Because when we see ourselves different or separate, our nervous system, our brain perceives a risk of not being part of that clan, that tribe. And so it's what we do from a survival standpoint. And I think that self-awareness of recognizing it and recognizing it has nothing to do with the other person is so very valuable. I mean, once that you have that self-awareness, it doesn't mean that you never compare or you never get triggered by something someone else does or says. It doesn't mean that you are, that you're like Teflon and you don't take anything as about you. But once that you recognize, oh, I see what I'm doing there. And I see the disconnect it causes between me and the other person. So it's brilliant for you to be in that place and see
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned early on in therapy was the difference between responding and reacting. And I think that learning the really genesis of that and what that actually means down to our foundation, learning that helped me in learning more about my self-awareness, because I no longer want to react. Well, I shouldn't say I don't want to. I want to react in a healthy way. But more often when we're doing so much inner work, it's more of a response. So we're less reactive like a dog, at the end of his chain, and we're kind of more like a cat and sitting back and being contemplative and thinking, and okay, well, here's my response. And I think that I think that has a lot to say about where we sit with our self-awareness.
Any tips for our listeners on how to do that?
Years of therapy.
It is really interesting because I do know, a lot of people really process their lives through therapy.
Mhm.
And, I think about this, many of my clients have a therapist and a coach. And I describe it as it's like you have a dentist and a doctor, right?
Mhm.
No different. You have a team. And so when I think about, mental health and emotional wellness, right? You need an entire team to help you stay on track and to figure out what isn't productive for you and what needs to change.
Mhm.
And so I love that. I love that. And are you a journaler? Do you journal? Do you talk it out with, you have a close knit group of friends? Like, what else besides therapy has been part of your inner work practice?
Journaling is part of my life in a big way, and yet I'll also say that it ebbs and flows. Excuse me. My family from both sides have an artistic flair, but I cannot draw a stick figure to save my life. I cannot play any musical instrument, but I can write and I can do words. So writing from very early on in books, reading, that was always kind of my thing was literature. So journaling became an outlet for me pretty early. I'd say junior high, I started journaling and I still do. But there are, I might go a year without writing in my journal, and it that doesn't give me any disdain or any negative feelings towards it. I know that there's seasons in my life when I need it, and then there's times when I might process things in a different way. But
Absolutely.
I'd say journaling, and my very best friend my best friend and my sister-in-law who know, I don't have to worry about when I say anything that they're going to judge in any way because they know me so, so well. So if I feel like I need to get something out, I can just spit it out however I need to. And, we all know that just talking is so good for our mental health, and it helps with releasing all those chemicals in the brain and to process things. So
Yeah.
I would say journaling and talking it out when need be.
Nice. How has the inner work that you've done maybe changed the course of the work that you bring to the world?
Uh, I hate to sound redundant, but I think that self-awareness, the first pieces of work that I did were so much about learning about myself. Excuse me, and what I brought into my life and what was handed to me, what I didn't have a choice with, and what I was going to do with it all, and how it was going to be a player in my life from here on out. So I think that learning, that was relatively early, in adulthood, mid to late 20s, you're still kind of figuring out who you are. So I think that was really good for me in a way, even though it was at a lot of a cost of, a lot of strife on my part. I think that being in therapy that early in my adulthood was helpful because it really solidified who I was to myself. And really helped me understand which direction I wanted to take my life and what my values were and where I wanted to see myself and take myself. So I think that really helped to lay a solid foundation.
So I want to talk about the work that you're doing now. And for our listeners, Angela is the founder of, or co-founder, I'm not even sure, the founder, a co-founder?
Co-founder, yep.
Of a nonprofit organization called Stay for Life. And I want you to tell our listeners about that organization and where they can learn more about it and the work
Absolutely.
that you do in that organization.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for asking. So Stay for Life is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So we're federally and state level recognized. And we are still relatively a baby of an organization. We're just over 3 years old. And as you stated, I'm the co-founder and now executive director of the organization. And we were started in 2022 after the suicide death of my 18-year-old son, Trent. So we lost Trent in June of 2022. And I was the one who found Trent deceased, and I was alone when I found him. Needless to say, there's a before and there's an after. There's the Angela that I was before I lost Trent, and there's the after. The after is forever changed. So when we lost Trent, and I say we because that after world involved myself, my son Caden, my now husband, Trent's stepdad, Donnie's 3 boys, my ex-husband, his new daughter, my mother, all of us who loved Trent, his best friends, his girlfriend at the time. So we all kind of, pulled in together and licked our wounds, obviously. Trent had just graduated high school here in Wells. He died on June 22nd, and he had just graduated on June 4th, I believe, that year. And almost immediately, and when I say almost immediately, I mean probably a week after we lost Trent, I started worrying about his classmates and his friends and his girlfriend, and worrying about the mental health of those students, those young adults who had just lost somebody that was important to them. So there we go with the caretaking, right? I was worried about how this was going to affect them. So almost immediately, I created with the help of my husband, some red magnets. And this is the first generation of the magnets here. And as you can see, it says, "You are not alone. Please call or text for crisis help." And at that time, it was this 188 number. And then it says, "In memory of Trent." About a month after we lost Trent, 988, which is the suicide and mental health crisis hotline, became a thing. So we took Sharpies to all of the magnets. But anyways, these were created with the goal of getting them in the hands of every single one of his classmates. So I believe it was 125 classmates. I had those magnets made and took it on to myself to get 1 or 2 in the hands of all of his classmates, for them to take away to college before they left, or, to have there at home on the refrigerator or whatnot. I just wanted every one of those young adults to know that they weren't alone, because when someone enters that really difficult place of suicidal ideation, that's how they feel. They feel alone. And it doesn't matter. They can be the most affluent, the most loved, the most beautiful, the most, have everything under the sun type of person, and still feel utterly alone. And I wanted them to know that there were places that they could reach out for help. So we created those magnets, and we got them in the hands of our community and Trent's graduating class. The response that we received from those magnets was just astronomical, from the kids, from the parents, from the extended family of those kids. Wow, this is needed. This is needed. Thank you so much. We appreciate this. I've used this, and my child has used this, whatnot. So the more we sat with that, and I say we because it was myself, my husband, my best friend, and my sister-in-law. The more we sat with this and got talking about it, and the more we learned about Trent's state of mind before he took his life, the more we learned about what people are feeling in those moments. Now, the reason I say this is so I've always been very, very involved in both of my boys' lives, mental health and otherwise. So they always had a comfortable home. Yes, I was a single mom for most of their lives, but they always had a healthy home. No serious financial insecurities. They always had warm beds and food and love from me. And they had in all aspects, a healthy home. We talked about mental health. We talked about suicide, things like that. Trent let me know, and I was always open about my mental health, and I let them know that genetically, they may be predisposed to addiction and depression and anxiety. So that was something that was never anything to be ashamed of in our house. And Trent had let on to me in the few days leading up to his suicide. He let on to me that he was feeling some stress in his life. And, the kid was 18. He had just graduated high school. He had a girlfriend. He was about to start a career at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. So I thought, well, yeah, of course you're feeling stressed. That's appropriate for what's going on. But he said, but I don't want to talk about it yet. And I said, okay, all right. Well, thank you for letting me know that you're feeling stressed. And I respect that you don't want to talk yet. So we'll put it on the back burner for now. And when you're ready to talk, then we'll talk. And then, within a few days, he took his life. So the more that I've been able to learn about where he was mentally, and this was kind of a culmination of finding notes and journal entries that he had written, talking with his girlfriend about things that he was sharing with her. And the more I learned, or I guess formed this thought and this idea in my head about men's mental health and about how boys and men are in our society predisposed to keep it all in. And this is a generalized statement, right? This is not going to be a one size fits all. And that's my precursor, is I know that that's not always the case. But for a larger percentage, a lot of men feel like they need to be strong and take it and not talk about their emotions and no crying and take it on the chest and keep moving forward and no weakness and no vulnerability and things like that. And quite frankly, that really made me mad, to put it lightly. And I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to make a difference so that other moms, other brothers, other dads, other step siblings didn't need to face what our family was going through. So I wanted to shine a light on men's mental health and suicide prevention. So as a very, very long answer to your question, that's how Stay for Life started. And when we first started talking about wanting to shine a light on this, we didn't at that point in time know that we wanted to make this a formal thing. We did not know that we wanted to make an organization or anything. It just started with the magnets and, hey, let's just get the community talking more about this. And then naturally, as things progressed, it just became bigger and bigger, and at a breakneck speed, has grown.
Well, if I can brag a little bit about the work that you're doing, you were invited to Gillette Stadium last year. Was it last year?
Yes, 2024.
Right.
Yep,
so here
year.
you are, an infant nonprofit in a small town in Maine, and tell our listeners about the invitation that you received.
Yeah. So I was contacted by the Myra Craft organization and the New England Patriots, and I had been nominated for the Myra Craft Award Community Cares. So basically, organizations or people, I should say, people are nominated for the work that they're doing in their communities, public facing and such. So that the mental health work that I had done thus far was being recognized. So that was very, very cool. It was an honor, very much. Very
exciting. And so how has, the speed at which Stay for Life has grown has been fast, right? It has been fast.
Yes.
But tell us about the programs and offerings and the community that you have brought together. And I love that, your husband, your sister-in-law, and your best friend are all members of the organization at a board level. Is that true? Is that?
Yes. Yep. So my best friend, after we got formed, and it did become, it quickly started growing, and it quickly started becoming more of a thing. There was going to be a lot more work. There was going to be a lot more dedication and a lot more awareness. And we the four of us sat back and said, wow, okay, so we can either do this or not. And this is what's going to be required of us. So how about everybody sits back for a minute, thinks about this, thinks about your life, and let's take an honest gander at hey, can I do this, and can this fit into my life, and can I do the amount of work and devote the amount of time to this that it's going to require. So at that time, my best friend said, I don't think that I can take on something that's moving at this speed. So she stepped back. She still helps us. She still volunteers. She helps us in all the ways that she can, but she's not formally involved any longer at this point. But my husband and my sister-in-law and now my brother are all part of the people that are the driving force. And in 2025, we actually welcomed another community member onto the board who is just as passionate and devoted and keeps everything running along.
That's wonderful. And talk about programming.
Yeah. So we have, I'd say five. I should have had them written down off the top in a list. Major touch points for the organization. A couple of the first foundations, one of the very first was our comfort boxes. So a comfort box is, it originally started as grief boxes. So a comfort box is for a family who has lost a loved one to suicide, and how to cope with that journey in those really early stages. And it started by me writing a letter to those people with what I learned in my early days. And here's what helped, here's what didn't help. So comfort boxes can be requested through our website, stayforlife.org. And they can be requested by the family who lost the loved one to suicide or someone close to that family. So it can be requested on behalf of a family. And since its inception, we've actually partnered up with another suicide prevention and post-vention organization called the KETA Center. So we collaborate with them, and these comfort boxes go all over the country. And we include age-appropriate books for children. And just, I'd say there's probably 24 to 30 different items in those boxes that help people navigate that journey. So that was one of the very first things that I did. One of the other early on projects is our light therapy initiative. So living here in New England, we noticeably our days get much shorter in the winter than they are in the warmer months. And many of us are affected by that lack of sunlight. There's lots of research and data that suggests that using a specific artificial light during these darker months is helpful to our mental health and to alleviate some of those depressive symptoms. Some research even suggests that it's as effective, if not more, than pharmaceutical help. So another one of our projects is we distribute light therapy lamps to individuals, one per family, anybody in need, free of charge. All they need to do is reach out to us during those winter months and say that they want one, and we send them, as long as we can financially support that initiative. I would say one of our biggest initiatives, we have two that are pretty big. The first one is Stay Man-to-Man Peer Support Group. And that is just what it sounds. Men's Peer Support Group. So this is something that we developed. We built from the ground up. We have a committee that developed this. We leaned on professionals from within our communities and across the nation on how to build this group, this organization, if you will, really, of a peer support group. So it's not professionally led. They're led by peer facilitators. It is men only, 18 and up at this point in time, just until we're able to navigate handling of minors and everything that's entailed there. But it's men that meet every day, every week on a specified day and time, and just talk about what's on their chest. It's not a stand-in for therapy. It's just a time for them to talk about what's going on in their lives or not. They can sit back and just take it all in. We started the first group here in Wells in May of 2023. And July of 24, we actually started our second location in Acton, Maine. So now we have two locations, and we're currently trying to build a third group that's been asked of us here in southern Maine as well. I don't want to put out the location yet because things aren't finalized, but
You don't have to.
we've been asked to start groups throughout in many, many areas. One of the things that we strive to do, and I think we're pretty successful with in Stay for Life, is not letting our cart get ahead of our horse. We have grown very, very, very fast. And what's being asked of us is way more than our handful of people can do. So we're really thoughtful and intentional when we start a new project and when we're starting these new groups, that we have everything in line before we start that. Excuse me. So that's our men's peer support group. Another one that's currently happening is Trent's Tree. So Trent's Tree is a holiday initiative, an interactive holiday initiative. To put it, I'll put it as simply as possible. These are holiday tree locations throughout Maine. At this point, we have 16 locations throughout Maine, and there's a holiday tree erected, and it's called a Trent's Tree, and people are invited to visit the location and hang an ornament. People are invited to bring their own ornaments, and there's any number of reasons that people might hang an ornament. One is to honor and remember Trent, because it's a Trent's Tree. The second reason is to honor and remember someone that they've lost to suicide in their life. And then a third reason that they may want to hang an ornament is to honor themselves or someone else who struggles with mental health. And then people are invited just to visit a location, just to see the love. And that sounds cliche, but every ornament that's hung on these trees is hung out of love. So the holidays can be so hard for everyone, especially those who grapple with grief and mental health struggles during the holiday season. So visiting the tree, you can just kind of gain a little bit of strength and know that you're not alone. You know, in addition to all those things that I've discussed, I do a lot of public speaking, presentations for students. We have student resource kits that schools can get through us to help support mental health awareness in suicide prevention with not only the students, but also how to help the staff support the students. So trying to educate and help build that knowledge base that the staff has. And we have events, we have resource tables at community events. We're basically just out there trying to get people, number one, talking about mental health and suicide, because that alone does its own work. Number two, getting resources in the hands of people so that they know what's out there to help them or a family member. And number three, getting talking about men's mental health and breaking that stigma, both with the men themselves and for anyone who loves a man who they think may be struggling with their mental health.
I want you to share, because I've heard you speak before, and you've shared some of the statistics of the numbers of suicide deaths and attempted suicides nationwide.
Yes.
I want you to share that with our audience.
Yeah. So the most recent formalized data is 2022, and I say that because it takes a lot of work for the CDC and to compute all of those numbers. So in 2022, we had in the U.S. alone over 49,000 individuals die of suicide. Of those 49,000, over 38,000 of them were men. The ratio is for every one woman that we lose to suicide, we lose 4 men to suicide. Now, if I could get my way, we wouldn't be losing anyone. You know, we support and advocate for men's mental health, but I want mental health and suicide prevention for everyone. We certainly don't discredit it for anyone, men, women, otherwise. And special focus needs to be paid to that ratio, because that's very gender heavy.
Yes.
We lose a person to suicide every 11 minutes. There is a suicide attempt every 27.5 seconds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. And it's way too many. It's way too many. And when you think about, those numbers, all of those people are somebody's son, somebody's daughter, somebody's parent, somebody's teacher, somebody's first responder. Everybody is somebody's somebody.
Yes, and those numbers just demonstrate how great the need is, not just in Maine, but throughout the entire country. The focus on men's mental health is so important because I'm going to just say I think that men typically don't seek out help. They're not seeking out peer groups. They're not seeking out support. So for you to bring these programs and offerings to the world is so important. I want to wrap up in a couple more questions about the work that you're doing now and how the inner work that you have done over your lifetime has prepared you to be in service in this way. I know you said you still struggle with balance. You are a nurturer and a mom. But how has that inner work prepared you to do this important work that you're doing?
That's a really good question. And I think that if I wasn't the kind of person who was able to be self-aware and introspective, let me back up. Let me start that again. Losing a loved one to suicide, like I said earlier, there's a before and there's an after. To be a parent who finds their child deceased rocks your world. There's no words. There are no words to describe how that changes your life outward and inward. Many people don't ever recover in a healthy way. There's no making that wound go away. Never, ever, ever, no matter how much inner work you do. And time continues to go on. Some people aren't able to continue putting one foot in front of the other. And by that, I mean the trauma of it all really swallows them up. And some people very rarely leave bed ever again. Some people rarely leave the house ever again. Very, very sadly, many people take their lives after going through a trauma like this. With my predisposed depression, I knew, and it was about the time that I got the idea of making those magnets. I knew that I had two choices. I could retreat or not. And that sounds really simple, but it's not. It would have been much easier to lay in bed for the rest of my life and cry about Trent and mourn him actively. But I knew that I would be no good for my family and my surviving son if I decided to go that route. I knew that it was going to be really hard. So here comes that self-awareness. I knew it was going to be hard, and I knew I had done a lot of hard work on myself already in my life. So I knew I was capable, and I knew I had a whole lot of strength in me. That's not to say that it was easy, that it was or is easy. I still have days where I don't want to get out of bed. There are still days where I kick and scream and yell and talk about how it's not fair and want to go back. None of it is easy. But I think that the inner work that I had done early on in my life kind of prepared me for a traumatic situation where I was going to have, I was going to face that fork in the road, and I could retreat or I could keep moving forward.
Yeah. So one last question, and then we're going to say goodbye. If you could leave our listeners with maybe some guidance on how to start the conversation about suicide, mental health, with a loved one that they're worried about, what do we say?
Yeah, it's really hard. And that's how I first I want to validate that it is really, really hard to start that conversation. And it can still be done. Letting people know that, number one, you love them. Number two, that you notice some changes in their lives or in their life. Hey, you don't seem like yourself lately. Hey, things have been really hard. Wow, you've been handed a really big bucket of worms lately. That's got to be hard. Let's talk about it. You're not responding to me the way that you used to. Is everything okay? One of the biggest things when you're starting those conversations is make sure that you're doing it intentionally. Make sure that you're not doing it in a passing by in the hallway. Make sure that you have the time to really listen. And don't be afraid to start those conversations. And if things get heavy, there's so many support resources that we can use when we're supporting a friend. One of the most valuable tools is 988, that mental health and suicide crisis support line. And what a lot of people don't realize, so this is the second gen of the magnet. What a lot of people don't realize about 988 is that it can be used by someone who is in crisis or someone who is supporting someone else. So if I'm supporting my friend and they're really not in a good way and I don't know what to say and I don't know how to navigate this, I could call or text 988 and that trained professional on the other end is going to help me understand how to support this person. So you're not alone in trying to help your friend or loved one.
Can you speak for just a minute about the belief that we should recognize signs before suicide happens? Because I know not every suicide has signs, telltale signs before it happens.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are some answers. And honestly, Laurel, sometimes there's not. Even in retrospect with Trent, I mean, yes, I can pull things apart really, really hard and think, okay, that day he said this and maybe he meant that. Sometimes there aren't going to be signs, and sometimes this is going to happen. On the other hand, things like withdrawing socially, whether that be from family or friends. Obviously, a traumatic event in someone's life can trigger a lot of mental health struggles. Giving up of hobbies, depending on drugs and alcohol. Now, I know that, in our society, we all tend to have a stressful day and we're going to have a glass of wine or a beer, but leaning on those things more so, a substantial change, or other things, food addiction or food aversion. So either depending more heavily on food or not eating, not wanting to keep up with personal hygiene, not taking care of oneself, all of these kind of things, just a real change in behavior that's outwardly, visible. And like I said, sometimes people are really, really good at covering those symptoms up, and sometimes we won't see those things.
Okay, I'm really going to finish with the questions, but I have one more. So
well, you have really great questions, so kudos to you.
So you've mentioned a couple times there was the Angela before and the Angela after. And I want to know the superpower of the Angela after.
Oh, goodness gracious. The Angela after, the superpower. Okay. So sometimes it's to my own demise, but I'm very easily able to put myself in someone else's shoes. And when I see someone acting in a way that might be hurtful to others, I no longer immediately get defensive and want to flip them off or whatnot. Instead, my first thought is, wow, what's going on in their lives? Wow, what has hurt them today? Wow, what hurt them in their childhood? And sometimes that can be to my detriment, because as my husband points out, sometimes people are just jerks just because they're jerks. And I understand that. But I would say that that's probably my superpower in the after Angela.
It's so incredible because, the world is more welcoming now more than ever before for high empathy. And to know that you are highly empathetic and it is a superpower is really, really, it's beautiful. And it's true. Some of our greatest gifts can be our downfalls if we overgive of the gift and we don't receive. I'm going to say equally. We can give But if we don't receive,
Hmm.
we really will exhaust ourselves by overusing our gifts.
Yep. And when that happens, then we crash and burn.
That's right.
And nobody is of use to anyone else. And that was one of the early lessons that I learned early in motherhood too, is, that the oxygen mask theory. You have to put your own oxygen mask on in order to assist those that you need to care for.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell you, my own experience is unlearning all of that service, especially of children, of others, of the relationships that we overserve in. Unlearning that behavior is really hard, and it's a lifetime of work. So keep up with that great work you're doing. And I will put all the information about Stay for Life in our show notes so that our listeners have it. And is there any way that you would like them to be able to reach out to you, follow Stay for Life? What would you like? What's the best way to reach out to Angela?
Yeah. As I mentioned, and I'm sure we'll be in the show notes, we do have a website, our hub of mental health resources and ways to contact us. So that's stayforlife.org. And there's a whole lot of ways to reach us through that. We also have a pretty steady social media presence on Facebook and on Instagram. So you can find us on both of those platforms.
That's wonderful. Anything else that you want to end with? Anything on your mind?
Just reminding everyone that they're not alone in this world. That deep dark hole can be a really scary place, and it's possible to come out of that deep dark hole. There's so many people that get there, and they may see only one outcome, but I'm here for the rest of my life to remind people that you can come out of that dark hole and you can get back to a life that's so full of light and so full of love, and just keep on staying.
Thank you again. The conversation just filled my heart. So much goodness has come out of the work that you're doing. And I loved just the way you brought forward your own experience and growing through what you had to go through. And you're still growing through it. So I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank you, Laurel. Thank you for this. This has been just a really nice conversation through a lot of different things. And thank you for the opportunity to share Stay for Life with people, and for everything that you do. Talk about service. Holy moly, you're doing a lot of good in our world. So thank you.
Well, that's it for now, listeners. We will be back next week for more Beautiful Work, Beautiful Life.